Welcome, wandering souls and lost sailors, to the Ship of the Dead podcast.
Welcome aboard, you salty dogs. Today, my guest is Mike Tuñez, one of the owners and studio manager of Firelock Games, and the lead designer of tabletop games like Blood and Plunder, Oak and Iron. I think the latest game is Port Royal.
Yes.
He's the proprietor of a fine line of pirate miniatures and games, and a fellow lover of pirate history. Mike, welcome aboard the Ship of the Dead, matey.
Hey, Luke. Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad. I was scheduling my guests for the year. I've scheduled about maybe 3 or 4 months of guests. And I was like, I had to go look at my list. Like, who do I want to have on the show? And you were the top of my list. I was like, we got to get Mike on. We got so much to talk about. A little bit of backstory. Mike and I have become acquainted over the years because I was a backer on the Oak and Iron Kickstarter, which delivered like the second week of COVID lockdown or something like that.
It was supposed to. But COVID got the containers all stuck.
It delivered in COVID. And of course, nobody can get together and play tabletop games. So you guys did this really cool thing where you did a tabletop simulator online campaign for like a couple months. We all, picked factions and played Oak and Iron online. For those who don't know, Oak and Iron is a tabletop naval war game, right?
Yeah. So that was kind of the predecessor to our Summer of Plunder that Blood and Pigment blog does now.
Man, that was a lot of fun. I guess I want to start before we get too deep into the game line, because we can talk about your game line all week. I want to start with the real question, though. Why pirates, Mike? Why do we love these like scurvy cutthroats so much? What is it for you that has drawn you to pirate games in general?
So for me, I live and grew up in South Florida and around the water a lot. And I've always been drawn just to the sea and to all aspects of it. And then from a very young age, I don't remember, as far as back as I can remember, I've just always had a fascination with pirates. It started with Captain Hook from the Peter Pan cartoons back in the day, and just kind of progressed. I've always been drawn to the idea of just people who live their life at sea, and the whole aesthetic of wooden ships and cannons and sailors and all that cool stuff.
Are we close enough in age that Hook was also an inspiration for you?
Yeah, so Hook would have been, I was kind of like a little older. Hook,
I think I was going to say maybe a few years older than me, because Hook for me was like, I wanted to be a lost boy or a pirate, so bad.
I definitely was into Hook. It was, I think I was maybe, hard to remember. Do you remember what year that came out?
I want to guess 92.
Yeah, I think I was like in 5th grade or something when that movie came out. But that was certainly, I was very excited about that film. But yeah, definitely that was a factor. And then as time went on and I started to just learn more about the history and the reality of it, and I became even more enthralled. It was a trip to St. Augustine here in Florida that got me really hooked on the historical aspect of it too.
But did it involve a tour of the fort there?
Oddly, yeah. So not the big one that everyone knows, though. The small one on the river called Fort Matanzas. And that was like the way that was all arranged. It was just really, it just kind of sucked me in from that. It was the first place we went. We went there because that's kind of outside the town. So we wanted to hit that on the way in. So it would be hard to get to later. And that was like, from there on, I was just totally enthralled in the whole.
Like how old were you when this happened?
Pretty old at this point. So this would have been 32.
Oh, but so it's a little bit more of a recent event. This isn't like a childhood event. Yeah,
for sure. And I've always kind of held the pirate fascination when the Pirates of the Caribbean movies came out. When Halloween, us and a bunch of friends all dressed up as pirates, and we set up a friend's pickup truck like a pirate ship and like ran around and caused chaos, and so it's always been a thing. But that, like, the historical side of it, which is more what we're known for now, is kind of more recent for sure. Like
interesting. I kind of have a similar story. I've always been into pirates. I love Pirates of the Caribbean, the ride, especially when I was a kid.
Oh yeah.
But I was on a trip down in South America and like in Chile, and I went to this old fort, and was playing D&D at the time. And I was like, dude, if I could just run pirate D&D, so it was the same kind of thing, seeing a historic thing to kick it off. Yeah. Well, that's very cool. Can you give us like the abridged version of how Firelock got started? I know you've told the story a lot, but I think the RPG people probably don't quite know. Like, how did you get into making tabletop games? And I'm assuming Blood and Plunder was the first game you guys made, right?
It was, yeah. Kind of just stumbled into it, really. I'll try to make it a quick story so I don't take up the whole time with this. But I was playing a game called Legend of the High Seas at the time. I had kind of gotten back into tabletop gaming. I had always played Battletech, but never really played much else. That was like my only tabletop game, really. a little bit of Hero Quest also. But right when I first got married and didn't have a ton of money to go out and do stuff, we were like, tabletop games was a good alternative, especially historicals, which are a lot more affordable to get into. So,
really?
I kind of dove in a little more into gaming and then discovered like the game called Legends of the High Seas. And I was like, wow, it never even occurred to me to play like 28 millimeter pirate wargaming, right? With scale ships and everything. And
that game it's a Warhammer spinoff, right?
It's based off the Lord of the Rings system, which is a Middle Earth strategy battle game, whatever they call it now.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a combination of that and Mordheim. So it was really fun. And the whole campaign system was built in. That kind of opened my imagination. This was before I even took that St. Augustine trip, right? So this was like, that game wasn't really trying to be terribly historical anyway, even though it was kind of billed as one. But then from there, so that kind of Games Workshop shut that whole Warhammer historicals down. And then the people I played with just kind of lost interest. But that I couldn't really find, I looked around, there was a few others, but nothing that was really quite the same. And I had just, I just said, I just took a shot at writing my own rules for it, right? And just kind of slowly progressed into different ideas and figured out how to build mechanics and all these things. Because it started out as a small skirmish game like Port Royal is now. After that St. Augustine trip, that was like the catalyst. Because that same trip is also the thing that got me started to decide to design the game, right? So it all happened at the same time. And then I bought some books and did things and kind of built on that. And then as I started learning more about the actual history, I realized, well, this, if I'm trying to do something a little more historical, a game with, 5 to 10 figures isn't really appropriate to cover the things I'm trying to do.
Yeah, that wouldn't happen that often.
Yeah, I know. So I scaled it up, and even still, it's kind of small. It's for realistic, but I'm not, we're not trying to make a simulation here. We're just trying to make a fun game that represents more representative. Right around the same time, I ended up getting laid off from a job, and which was kind of a blessing and a curse because I hated that job. And I just wanted to, so I was going back to school, and my wife had just gotten a really good job. So it kind of worked out all right. So we didn't have any kids or anything at the time. So I just went back to school with the intention of getting a history degree and focusing on this just because I was so enthralled with all the pirate stuff at the time.
Wait, so you went back for basically pirate history?
More or less, yeah. Even though it didn't really work out that way, they didn't really let me focus on what I wanted because I was too. Yeah. So I did go back because I had never gotten. I had done like a year of college and then kind of stopped going. Went back into it. In my 30s to go ahead and finish. And I didn't actually finish because of this. We started this. I got my associates, and I was like a year away from graduating, but didn't quite make it. But that time did give me some really good tools and access to the university libraries and stuff. So I was able to get a lot of really good resources and put a lot of cool stuff together. Florida International University. So cool. Yeah. So not a huge school, but local state college here in Miami.
Well, and you're in a great area. I mean, like if you're anywhere in the States to study pirates, like why not Florida, right?
Yeah, and I used to walk there. I mean, it was like a couple blocks from my house at the time, so it was very convenient. Kind of all worked out. But anyway, so as I was studying, I was kind of just like designing this game on the side and doing some part-time work. And, I didn't really take it serious. My plan was just to release a PDF and just have some rules out there that people could play. And then as I was kind of starting to get toward something that I was feeling like was almost ready to put out, this was around the time that Black Sails came out. The show Black Sails had just come out.
The beloved TV show.
Right.
It debuted on Stars, right?
Right, Stars. So I was watching that. And then a few months prior, I had met my current business partner, Alex Aguila. And he had been very successful in business in the past with Alienware. That was a company he helped start. So nice. He was retired at the time. So me and him, we became pretty good friends because we were playing at this time. Also, BattleTech Alpha Strike had come out, so he was getting back into it, and he would play BattleTech back in the day. So when he was really excited about Alpha Strike, that's how we met through that. And then we were playing that like on weekday afternoons and stuff. And we were both watching Black Sails, and we were talking about it. He was like, "Man, it'd be really is there any?" I've never seen any good like pirate miniatures games. And I was like, well, as it happens, I've been designing one for a few years. So
step into my office.
So
sure.
So anyway, he played it, and we both played it, and then we did a ship battle. That was because that was that's what he wanted to do. He loved it, and he was kind of talking after. He was like, I've always gaming's always been a huge part of my life, and I've always wanted to start a game company. And I think you got something really good here. And what do you think? Would you be willing to do that and with me with this game? And I said, at this point, why not?
Yeah, sure.
I don't really got much else going on. And then, the plan was just to kind of, while I finished school, I just do this work on this with him. And again, even then our aspirations weren't huge, although that started to change as we both started to get more excited about the idea of what we were doing. We were learning. Sure. We literally walked into this knowing nothing. Like the next day after we talked, I met up at his house and we literally went and Googled how to make miniatures. So,
yeah, you guys, I love that you came from like totally ground zero. Like, I had no idea.
No clue. I knew the history side of things. Game design was obviously new to me at that point. So we were kind of like both. And then he came in and we developed it more. We brought in Fred Barnard, who helped write the book as well. And then we kind of got, just various gamers together who had a lot of experience, and we were able to make the rules work from there. And then he had the business experience, but it's a totally different industry.
Well, sure, but accounting and management and sensibilities like that, marketing, those things help.
That was critical, I think, to the success we achieved for sure.
Well, I mean, and you guys, even the first Kickstarter was a smash hit. So I think you guys hit the ground running. That
totally destroyed our expectations. I mean, we thought we did like 3 times what we expected to do. So that was
awesome.
Was really exciting, obviously. But
so for our like kind of more role playing game focused audience, can you give us like the top down overview of what Blood and Plunder is? Like, what kind of game is it, and like maybe a brief description of how the dice system works, the rule system works.
Yeah, so it's a tabletop miniature war game, right? A skirmish scale one. So that and skirmish has different definitions, but in our case, it just means that one guy represents one guy.
Like, what's the average force size? If you were playing a normal Blood and Plunder match, would it be like 20 models?
It really depends on how elite your force is. So somewhere between 20 and 50 is pretty average on an average game. So somewhere inside that scope. So let's say 35, call it even a 35. Is probably the average. And, if you're not familiar with war games, the very brief overview is you basically play on what's essentially like scale model terrain. And then you use measuring tapes or various tools like that to determine distances and how far things can move and shoot, etc. And then you use dice or cards or other mechanics like that to resolve things that happen in the game. So shooting or activation or whatever. So in Blood and Plunder, it's a card-driven activation system. So based on you draw a hand of cards equal to the amount of units that you have, and a unit is just a collection of guys that are operating together, like a little team, I guess you could say, squad. You and your opponent each play a card, and whoever has the higher initiative on their card will go first. And typically higher initiative means you have less action, so it's a little bit of a compromise and some tactical choices there. And then you move your units around, or Blood and Plunder is kind of unique in that you can play with your guys on the ground. You can also play with them on ships, and they can sail around, and you can control the ships as well. So this is something pretty uncommon to most war games. It has like an amphibious aspect. It's one of the things that makes it unique.
You mean it has pirate ships? Yeah.
Basically, yes. As one behind me there. So that's one of our ships there. So
we're going to talk about the miniatures here in a second.
So then you can take actions. Your units have actions they can spend to move, to shoot each other, to fight in melee combat, to rally, to get rid of their fatigue. The combat and the things they're doing will affect them and make them less effective over time, and you can take actions to kind of mitigate that. And that's then you're typically fighting over some kind of objective, and that's pretty good, I think, general overview of what the game is.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I've never actually played Blood and Plunder. Amazingly, I'm not really a war gamer, but even more than I'm not really a competitive gamer. The last time I was like seriously playing competitive games was that Oak and Iron like online thing. And it's just like, I don't know, like I like the story so much, but then I get stressed out from losing, and I don't, so I got to play, man. I got to, Gen Con next year or something. We got to get a little skirmish going.
That sounds great. Yeah,
figure it out. Okay, so like if we're going from Blood and Plunder, and you guys have a bunch of different lines that have kind of jumped off this. You've got Blood and Valor, which is like a World War I. Blood and Steel, which is kind of like Queen Victoria era, Civil War, if you will.
Yeah.
Blood and Crowns is medieval Europe. Blood and Bayonets is Napoleonic Wars. Yeah,
that's forthcoming. Yeah,
forthcoming. Just kind of like
Kickstarter's next week for that, actually. Yeah, so the Kickstarter's going live on the 29th of January. I don't know when this is coming.
Oh, great. Yet. Okay, so hey, if you're into Napoleonic War skirmish games, check out Blood and Bayonets coming. Probably when you're listening to this on your podcast site, it'll probably be out. But I think the newest release, I mean, those are all kind of like the same vibe as Blood and Plunder, but in different eras, right? Different types of models, and Do you want to say anything about any of those 4 lines?
Definitely. So there's Blood and Valor, and I'll do them in the order they came out. Blood and Valor, which is the World War I. Blood and Steel, which is Victorian era. Blood and Crowns, which is the 100 Years' War, medieval stuff. And Blood and Bayonets, which is about to come out, which is Napoleonics, focusing on the Peninsular War. And all of those, basically what it is So people really liked the mechanics for Blood and Plunder and felt like they could utilize them in different settings. So what we've done is in a lot of these settings, it's not really to support all these games with a model line would be impossible for us. But there's lots of miniatures available in all these types of games, right? So lots of people have World War I models or medieval models and things like that. So we just adapt the rules. We have different people who are into these different settings, right? And they'll come to us and say, hey, we want to adapt your game into this. We say, go for it, and we just give them some publishing credits, and then
Wait, so of those lines, how many do you actually make miniatures for?
None. We didn't make miniatures for none of them.
So just Blood and Plunder.
Just Blood and Plunder, yeah. Blood and Plunder,
okay, cool.
And Oak and Iron, because they're kind of in the same universe, if you will.
Oh yeah. Okay, and I'm assuming you can just use. Obviously, we'll talk about Port Royal in a second, but you can just use Blood and Plunder miniatures for Port Royal. Yeah, it's
completely interchangeable, Blood and Plunder miniatures wise. Yeah, and it's falls into the same universe. So we're just trying to keep our little ecosystems there intact with those things.
Okay. So when I'm man, I'm gonna make. I mean, this won't be me because this isn't my genre. But if someone were like, hey, let's make Blood and Horses or whatever, Blood and Cowboys. That could be another forthcoming one that,
Correct.
You guys end up publishing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, let's talk about Port Royal, because I think this is probably a little bit more my speed, is because I'm not a huge miniature painter. I feel like if we're going to get into a game, what is it, 4 to 8 miniatures? It's like a skirmish game, taking place kind of when the Port Royal earthquake happens, right? Give us the elevator pitch for that.
So Port Royal is kind of again, it kind of goes back to the roots of where Blood and Plunder started, but just kind of goes into a little bit more of the Hollywood aspect while still kind of being grounded in the history stuff. Port Royal, though, is a scaled down game. So it's not as much a competitive game as it is a narrative game. There's certainly a competitive aspect still, because that's just the way I like to design things. I like it to be very tactical and very kind of chess-like. That's just what I like. Most people aren't going to be, I think, playing hardcore to win. This is going to be a game that's more set in a very specific place. So it's set in Port Royal. There's an earthquake in 1692 that destroys the whole city, right? And then there's a few lines in the narrative of what happens, right, in the historical records that we have that talk about basically the buccaneers that are on the island are just looting and rampaging throughout the island while the earth is still shaking. People, they're just raiding warehouses and stealing what they can.
Yeah.
And so we basically got that little bit and ran with it, and then created this kind of whole extra narrative around it, where there's everyone around Port Royal is kind of sending little groups to jump into town and basically raid and pillage what's still there while the aftershocks are continuing to occur and stuff. So it's a very different system than Blood and Plunder, while still being kind of similar in a lot of ways. All the stats are the same, but you play them pretty differently, and it's campaign driven. That's the big thing. So that's the big thing, is that you're going to make your crew, your roster, your guys are all going to have names. And you have your officers, and you have your grunts. From game to game, you'll gain experience, and you'll gain loot, and you'll find items and different things like that. And you kind of just build the story as you go. And then some of your grunts can graduate up to become officers. You can lose officers and different, all kinds of different stuff like that you can encounter. There's all kinds of things you can encounter. There's wildlife, and there's characters like priests and rich merchants and whatever. All these things are all there for you to interact with within the campaign setting.
It kind of sounds a lot like Frostgrave. Have you played that?
Yes, it's exactly that kind of game.
Great, or maybe even better, what Ghosts of Archipelago is their kind of pirate. They're pirate fantasy one,
tropical version, I guess.
Yeah, tropical. Yeah,
it's very much in that vein. Yeah, it's a little more detailed than that, as I think in those games, you're the only guy you really track is your leader.
Yeah,
if I remember correctly,
got real stats. Yeah.
In this, you have your officers are the ones you're going to track the most, and your grunts are still going to track, but you're going to track them in groups. Okay, so that it's just a little more manageable.
But it's similar that you're going in to grab loot, and you might get. I'm assuming you might get killed by a landslide or a falling building.
Yes, correct. That could happen.
Whereas in Frostgrave, you might get killed by a wandering demon, or whatever.
Yeah, and then instead of a demon, it could be a crocodile or a wild boar or some.
Sure.
Okay,
that.
Yeah, or a building falling on you. All these things happen. Yeah,
it's Hollywood Port Royal. I love that. Yeah,
exactly.
Have you read On Stranger Tides?
I have, actually. Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that book. I love that. This is a spoiler if you haven't read that book, but I love that earthquake is caused by the necromancer Blackbeard learning necromancy and messing it up, and it basically causes that earthquake. I think that's the best hook. That's so cool. That does make me wonder. Have you? I think we maybe talked a little bit about this at Gen Con, but are you guys thinking about doing anything more on the fantasy side, adding the undead element to the Firelock world, or what do you think?
Yes. So we've been planning for that for like the last year and a half, more or less. But we do plan on having another full range game where there's going to be miniatures and the whole 9 yards in a fantasy setting. Now, it's not really going to be a pirate setting, if you will, but it's very inspired by the things. It's kind of like the whole setting is going to be set in like an Age of Discovery kind of setting, like in a different world. And there will be, so it's still going to be an amphibious game like Blood and Plunder, where there is sea battles and land battles, and it kind of integrates in the same thing. So it's based on the Blood and Plunder mechanics, just like all the other Blood and games, right? Like the World War I or whatever. But this one's a fully supported one in a fantasy setting. And we're setting it up in such a way that we're going to be creating all of our unique factions and models and things, but it's also set up to be kind of generic as well, where there's going to kind of be like template factions and units and things that you could bring in from any kind of fantasy setting, because kind of the storyline, that just to give a little preview of what's happening in this world, is that it's kind of just like a series of islands, archipelagos and things like that. And there's been like, for ages, nobody's been able to travel the seas because they've been too tumultuous, and things happen that change that. And all of a sudden, there's these different groups that can now interact. So there's some strong groups that become really powerful because they're very high in technology, right? And they have like, they're basically like in the 18th century level of technology, while there's other places where they're stuck in like a dark age kind of setting, right? They're like kind of like Vikings or whatever. So it's it's going to vary. So you can kind of, because I really love like classic Tolkien style fantasy as well.
Sure.
So this is kind of like a mesh of both those things. So kind of like your Pirates of the Caribbean kind of meets Tolkien sort of a world.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. See, this is why we're friends, Mike.
That's kind of what the gist of the world we're setting in. And then this year we will be running a Kickstarter for kind of like a prequel game. So this is set in the past of the setting that we're doing. And it's kind of in the vein of Port Royal, but it's a different game. And it's just kind of set in this kind of medieval setting where there's this island that gets cut off, and they just have like no resources, and you're just controlling the small group of like brigands and barbarians that are just trying to survive, and they're just kind of fighting each other for resources and things. I actually designed this game for the One Box War Game Challenge. I just got distracted with other things and never submitted it. So
I love that.
Big shout out to those guys for giving me the inspiration to put it together and do that. And then that was kind of like, we kind of just ended up dovetailing it into our setting and stuff.
So that will be later this year. And then when do you have an estimated, like, is there a pre-release or a beta for the?
So we will be debuting it for the first time at Adepticon this year. So we'll have demos of it there, and we'll show some of the models and some of the things. So we've already got a full range of models done for it and everything. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be a cool thing.
Yeah. So when you say full support, you mean models as well. That's very cool.
Yeah. Models, books, cards, all the typical things we do for like we do for Blood and Plunder, Oak and Iron, or anything like that.
I'm really curious if like you're going to have obviously you won't be diminishing your fan base, but I feel like you're going to get a whole new group of people, because in the Oak and Iron campaign, I was like, I'm the only guy here who cares about fantasy. Like there were all these dudes that were like, they were playing Dutch, and like, they did not care about my like pseudo undead pirates. They were like very, very historic. So I'm curious to see how your community grows when you guys pivot into a little bit more of a less historic game,
Well, and that's part of the plan, right? Like I think in the historical setting, it's already kind of crowded, and we don't really have an interest in trying to compete with larger companies that are kind of trying to hit all the historical niches. And for me, it's the colonial stuff, like the pirates and even the American Revolutionary War and things like around that nature. Like kind of anything outside of that is less interesting to me as far as history goes. Which I do enjoy it. I have a bunch of ancients and stuff that I play. I think ancients is really fun and all that. But it's just not in that sort of thing. It's just not. It's not the kind of thing I'm driven to work on. Whereas,
I'm with you. I mean, I have a bunch of stuff like that. Like for me, it's like cyberpunk and anything science fiction. I'm wearing an alien hat. I love science fiction, but like I don't really have any interest in making content for that kind of setting. So I totally get you. It just doesn't sing to you. There's something about the pirate and the colonial vibe that you were like. It's not so far back that you can't imagine it, but it's far back enough that it's like definitely not reality. You're definitely still doing that escapism thing. There's no cell phones, I want to talk a little bit about your miniatures because obviously this is one of the main reasons that I know you. The Oak and Iron line is so good that we have your ships at our booth to show off our naval combat, which is obviously not a war game. It's very much RPG rules for naval combat,
which I appreciate.
Yes, of course. And we tell people all the time. People try to buy our miniatures all the time. It's like, nope, gotta go to Firelock. And at Gen Con, it was cool because we were like, they're right there. Just go next door to get those. I want to talk a little bit about your process, both for the ship miniatures, but also the whole, Blood and Plunder line. Like, do you guys hire concept artists? Do you have sculptors on staff? Like, what's the design pipeline for making miniatures? And where do you get your inspiration?
Good question. We have artists that we work with, but typically more just for kind of like book art and things like that. And we've really utilized them. We've utilized them some in Blood and Plunder. If you've seen some of that stuff, some of the art there. Also for the RPG, our World War II RPG, War Stories. But we do have 2 in-house sculptors. We previously had 1, now we have 2. So we've been building a lot for Blood and Plunder, and now we're going to start doing a bunch more for Oak and Iron. As this year, Oak and Iron 2nd edition is coming out here in late February.
Shut up and take my money.
So with that relaunch, because the game is currently out of stock, so I've had a 2nd edition cooking around for a while, so it's pretty minor stuff. If you play the game, it just kind of streamlines it and balances some things. Yeah. But anyway, that's not the question. The question is the process. So doing historical stuff, we typically start with, when it comes to ships, often we will use some images combined with some plans. So it's pretty easy it's often pretty easy to find plans for a lot of these ships. So that's typically where we go. And then for Blood and Plunder, we will also have our graphic artist do concept art. So she'll kind of just do line art of the ship from different sides for the sculptor to go off of. And we didn't do that previously. So some of our first ships, we didn't do that. And they are, while I think they're still really nice, they're not nearly as nice, I think, as the ones we've been doing since. So since we started doing the concept art, it really kind of guides the whole thing a lot better. You
do have this cool thing that there is an entire hobby around building model ships.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to find, fairly, who knows if they're really accurate, but fairly accurate, ship model plans for anything that would work for a miniatures game. Yeah.
And they're more than accurate enough for what we need. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We're not making scale models really we're not doing museum scale models or anything like that. We're doing, there's compromises to make them playable. And
to make them, castable. And they're pretty sturdy. And the way you do the sails, I know the sail plans have to get compromised sometimes because you can't just have plastic floating in the middle.
Our sails are generally too small. They're missing a spar in one place, just things that are compromises to make them accessible, especially for Oak and Iron. Because for Oak and Iron, we really wanted an accessible game. I really love what Fantasy Flight had done with games like X-Wing, for example.
Yeah.
And, we don't have the budget to do pre-paint stuff, but we figured a model that you could just push together and then there's at least white sails and brown holes will be an appeal to people who are a little intimidated by the hobby aspect.
I want to talk about the new molding equipment you guys have, but I know that the core box set, and I'm assuming this one coming up, that's one of the cool things is you don't have to paint them because they work with the brown bodies and the white sails. Is the equipment you have now, can it do color like that?
So it sort of can. The process to do so is tedious and slows us down a lot. When we do individual ships that we sell, expanded ones like the Galleon, and blisters, those are typically just being gray resin. So that's kind of more of the advanced ships, with kind of how we look at them. Because we could do them in color, but we really don't have the volume on those to really justify it because of the amount of prep time and everything it just takes. Oak and Iron is actually the slowest thing for us to cast here because of all the parts. So you have the hull and the mass, and they're all kind of large. They take up a lot of volume. They're kind of slow to make compared to regular 28 millimeter miniatures. So for example, it's like doing one Oak and Iron ship is about the equivalent of 2 packs of Blood and Plunder figures.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So as far as just casting time or printing time or whatever it is, we're doing it.
Yeah.
It's much more time consuming. That said, so that's kind of, we've struggled to find a good way to do individual Oak and Iron ships because the ones we did in the Kickstarter, all the ones in the boxes, so you get 3 or you get the 2 in the Blackbeard box or the starter set that has 6, right? When you do them that way, it works. But when you try it in the Kickstarter, we had one ship by itself, and that one ship in the blister pack by itself with that process actually cost more to make than the box it came in. So we kind of didn't make any. We lost some money on those. We just didn't do that again. And that was obviously something people had a lot of demand for, was those. So we've been ever since trying to find a good process to do that. I think we're in a good place now. So we're going to try that. We're going to try we've been doing them with 3D printing lately. So now we're going to try to continue that and see if we can handle the volume. So hopefully we can. I mean, so worst case scenario, we just got to buy more printers. So that would be a good problem to have.
I just love that you guys have that it's kind of like a pirate vibe. You're like faking it till you make it, or like figuring out the problems as they show. I mean, it's the same thing over here. It's like, well, how do we do that? I don't know. Like, let's try it. And it worked. Like, oh no, that was a total failure. You lost money on that. It happens, man.
Exactly.
It happens.
Working with new processes, and when you're trying to do some things that are different from what you've done before, there's always little things that are slightly different that make huge changes,
Sure. Well, and I mean, also, anytime you take something in-house, it's like, okay, now we don't have to ship it from overseas, but now we got to hire a guy to run this machine all the time. Or, it's just like when you're dealing with shipping. I mean, anybody who runs any company understands these little growing pains. But from the outside, it seems like it's going great. So I'm excited to see what you guys have in the pipeline, especially for Oak and Iron. I want to talk a little bit about RPGs because I didn't even know about War Stories until I was doing some research for this episode. Tell us about War Stories. It's a World War II RPG. I think it uses Free League's Year Zero engine. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Give us the pitch for that. What's that all about? Who would be interested in playing that game, and what's the vibe? How does it compare to other RPGs?
I'm actually not a huge RPG guy. I'm the worst guy to give you this pitch, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah, okay.
So War Stories came about when we were in the middle of putting together a Raise the Black RPG. I was so inundated with that because my business partner he had just rewatched Band of Brothers. And he was like, I'm going to get my RPG group and I'm going to run a session based on Band of Brothers. He went to look for a system for that, and was shocked to discover that there really wasn't any. There was a bunch of kind of Cthulhu-esque, weird war stuff, but there wasn't anything that you could run like a historical without modifying it. And he's not into that. He doesn't want to modify anything. He just wants to run it how it is. So he'll write his own adventures, but he doesn't want to modify the system. So he just calls me after he's figured this out. He goes, "Did you know that there's no war?" And I told him that there's no way. That can't be possible. Like, there has to be one. So I went and looked, and then sure enough, there wasn't. And he's like, "We need to do this." Like, we have one of the guys he does RPGs with. His name's Gabriel Garcia, and he was like, "Me and Gabe, we can work with this. We can do it." And he's like, "Don't worry, you don't." And I was already like, "No. I'm not going to get to anything else right now." And he was like, "Don't worry, I'm going to do it completely off to the side. All you got to do is help me just get it printed, and that's it." So that's kind of how it went. I play tested it. I've played War Stories in total 2 times, and both times were really fun. I did. Let me see what's my RPG experience. I've done. My first experience was like a homebrew RPG D20 kind of game that a friend of mine put together. It was not the best. It was fine. Sure. But I mean, it just was at the time. It just wasn't. Maybe it was great, and I just don't know.
It's almost like dating. You got to have the right chemistry.
For sure. I think that definitely was a factor. I did a little bit of the Mech Warrior, the BattleTech RPG, and that I'd had a good time with that. I did one session of Shadowrun. My brother was putting together a campaign, and we got one game off the ground. That was all that happened. And then I played 4th edition a couple times. A friend of mine was running a 4th edition D&D, and he needed people, so I
was just going to ask if you never played D&D. But you played the least popular edition. The least popular edition of D&D is the one that you played.
And I'll say, and I will give you a controversial take here, it's the most fun I've had playing an RPG up until I played War Stories.
Sure. Hey, listen, I think there's a lot of people who love 4th edition. I think it's just more of like, it's not what the core D&D audience wanted. No, I think
what we played was basically like just a dungeon crawl with a little more role play. Yeah, so that was the guy's first time running a campaign, and so he didn't really, he just wanted to try it out.
Well, Mike, we got to play Pirate Borg. I mean, come on.
I know. We have it here. I was actually looking. My partner Alex actually stole. I was gonna bring it out so I could show that I have it here. Normally I have it here, but he took it, unfortunately, to read it.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Well, we should do like a Firelock Limithron like company mixer and run some Pirate Borg and play some Blood and Plunder.
That would be really fun. Very definitely. So anyway, War Stories, I played it a couple of times. I was like, this is great. This is such a simple, easy to play system. Gets you right into the action of what's going on. It needed no explanation. There was nothing it was pretty easy to figure out. So I really enjoyed that aspect of that engine. So it was pretty cool. So War Stories is it's a historical World War II RPG, and it's designed with a simple system like that in mind to kind of get out of your way and just let you focus on playing the game. The Year Zero engine is really good for that. We have modified it some. We've made it a lot more lethal, right?
Oh, nice.
So,
well, it is It is World War II.
It is World War II, yeah. So there's all kinds of extra things in there. So like you are part of a company, and then you're all playing as a squad. So if your character gets killed, you have replacements that'll come in from the company to take your place. You just kind of keep going.
Wait, so is it like a combat RPG, or like what kind of things are you doing besides
it's very flexible in that regard. It does cover combat thoroughly, obviously. I mean, being a World War II RPG, but there's all kinds of other things you could do with it. Like there's different characters that just come stock in the book, right? There's a combat correspondent. There's a French resistance. There's all kinds of different things like that you could do. I mean, you can use it to play anything in kind of the time period.
I'm immediately like, oh yeah, this is like Castle Wolfenstein.
Yes,
like
you can totally
elite World War II squad has to sneak into the Nazi castle. Like that's a no-brainer, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, you can totally do stuff like that with it. I'm trying to think about things because I have not played any other Year Zero games, but they've told me lots of stuff that changes. So I'm trying to remember.
It's okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, from my playing of it, it's just if you know Year Zero, it's kind of totally in that vein. It just adds a little bit more of realism, I guess, if you want to call it that. So like there's a D10 added in for hit location. So where you get hit matters. So when you get shot, you could get shot. If you get shot in the head, it's pretty much probably the end. There's like you get hit in the body and the legs and the hands. You can get.
When I'm picturing the World War II RPG experience, like I'm 100% carrying my wounded colleague because his leg is busted. Like that's a huge part of every, I'm just thinking,
that's totally
Band of Brothers.
First game we played, right? That's what it was. Like we just get ambushed and we're just dragging each other out of there.
Yeah, it's like dealing with the attrition is the game, right? It's like, can you get out alive?
It can be because we played another mission where there wasn't so much combat. It really was kind of just trying to avoid the combat, right? So we're trying to just trying to get through a combat zone to get your thing and get out, right? And then that was really fun because it was kind of the GM, and Gabe was the GM, did an excellent job of kind of just like narrating us through it. And there was a chance that we screwed up and ended up in fights that we shouldn't have gotten into.
Yeah. And now I'm thinking of like, well, it could be Castle Wolfenstein, but it's also Inglourious Bastards, right? Like that's
totally.
That's not a skirmish game. That's a RPG. They're sitting there having to lie their way out of espionage missions. It's perfect. Yeah, I like that a lot.
And there's tons of stuff, and people have done all kinds of games. I've seen a few online that there's like somebody's playing a tank crew. To the crew of a tank, and everybody's doing all the different things. And then we're doing, so that's another game we're expanding this year. There's a Kickstarter coming this year to do the Pacific, and that's going to add a bunch of new stuff.
Are you a big World War II guy as well?
I'm not a huge World War II guy as much as any other person my age, I think, especially as a war gamer. I'm more interested in kind of the fringe conflicts around it, like the war with like the Finns and the Russians and all that stuff that's kind of like tied in with it. To me, that's more interesting for some reason. But
have you ever been to the World War II Museum in New Orleans?
No, I haven't.
When you said that you were adding the Pacific, they kind of did the same thing. They did the like European campaign first, and then a couple years later they finished it. But that museum, anybody listening, if you're ever in New Orleans, it's like one of the top things to do there. They have so much cool stuff. Tom Hanks did this, like they call it a 4D movie where they're like planes come out of the screen and there's like smoke and stuff in the theater. It's pretty cool. I want to talk a little bit about, whatever you can tell me about, was it Under the Black Sails?
Yes. So that's previous working title.
Okay. So what is the status of the Firelock historical pirate RPG that I've been waiting for so many years now?
I know. So that was a game that unfortunately was just kind of all over the place. Not the fault of the guy who was designing it. So he originally wrote a completely original system, kind of inspired by Blood and Plunder. So it had like activation cards and different things you'd use those for. And I played it with him a couple times, and that was great. It was really fun. It was really interesting, and I totally got into it. I was excited for it to come out. And when we did War Stories, when the idea for War Stories came around, we kind of figured it'd be better to have everything in the same kind of game engine.
Yeah.
So we kind of made a hard call and said, all right, let's just, can we convert it? And the guy was like, I mean, I can. I wasn't really excited to do that, which turned out to really not be the best decision going forward. And that ended up just getting, he kind of submitted it when it was ready, but then there was a lot of the old stuff still in there because at the time he was kind of all in this industry, but now he's had to like kind of basically go to where there's, actual money to be made. So
yeah, sure.
It's been like kind of a side thing for him. And we felt like it was just a burden. We were just a burden on him. So we're like, it's fine. We just paid him for the time he spent on it and decided we just need to do something and start over with a whole new idea. So then we got Fred Barnard, who's one of the guys who helped bring all of Blood and Plunder together, and who is also his main thing is RPGs. Like he's a all he does is he loves RPGs, and that's what he does. He reads every book that comes out and doesn't play them just to get the mechanics.
Sure.
He's into that sort of thing. So we're going to be working with him now. The game doesn't really have a title. It's probably just going to be Blood and Plunder role-playing game or something.
RPG, yeah.
RPG, just to kind. We're bringing it into, especially now that we have Port Royal, we have Oak and Iron, we have Blood and Plunder. So the idea is to use this as kind of like the thing that can tie them together. It's going to use some mechanics, at least as of now. I mean, who knows? I could change it this way. But as of where it is right now, it's utilizing mechanics from Port Royal, and especially the combat resolution stuff for Port Royal, because it's very interactive. It's going to utilize that system, the good thing about that system is that ties in closer with Blood and Plunder proper, so that you can kind of have a more integrated experience. So if you're familiar with that, you can kind of connect them a little better.
When Oak and Iron came out, I was like, okay, so like now you just need the RPG. I mean, like before I wrote my own RPG version of naval combat, we would just use Oak and Iron. It's a little too crunchy for RPG because the focus is in the wrong spot. But like if you had a system designed for that, it'd be great if you're like, the same mechanics we're used to when we're fighting like 5 guys to 5 guys as an RPG, we're using in naval combat, and we're using for like large scale, we're going to attack the fort combat. Like that's perfect. It's like, why not make it all the same ecosystem,
Yeah, exactly.
Like Year Zero might have worked, but then you have the conversion problem with all your other games,
Right. We've kind of thrown ideas back and forth, like simplified Oak and Iron that you can integrate and stuff like that. None of that's set in stone yet, but that's kind of things we've been discussing to see if we can make it work.
And Oak and Iron's not like, it's not that complicated, you're going to play a 6-ship battle could last 2 hours.
Yeah. And then there's a lot of stuff to bring detail into the game that bring basically some of those RPG elements, sort of, right? So that would be all removed so that you could just have your GM take you through that stuff instead of the game generating it. So that's kind of what I mean by simplified. Not so much, but the way the ships move and shoot would basically probably be very similar. Yeah,
of course. Why wouldn't it be? Yeah. Right. Wait, so is there any kind of timeline? When can we look forward to?
Yeah, so there's no timeline right now. So
it's an early redevelopment, if you will.
Yeah, it is in an early stage, but we have kind of the framework for what it's going to, the core of it will be. Sure, so unless something changes, that's pretty much going forward. So like you could play the game right now. It just needs to be refined. So I would imagine that this would probably be a 2026 project, probably a 2026 Kickstarter, maybe a 2027 release. Something like that. Just because, and especially because of all the things we have a lot of things in the pipeline right now. We basically spent last year building up to put things out this year. So.
Yeah, I get it, man. I get it. Like we have talks of our own skirmish game that will be kind of it's the opposite approach. We're taking our RPG system so that you can roll a D20, but doing it in a skirmish game. But we're not going to get to it we're not going to start working on it until like 2027. It's like there's too many things to make, So, well, just a reminder that I had been tapped in to do some maps for Under the Black Sails. If you guys need those pirate maps, just because they're going in the Dark Caribbean doesn't mean you can't use them in a historical version too. So,
totally, yeah, definitely, and it's going to cover a lot. We'll definitely talk.
I just love the idea of it being fully historic because the deeper I go into the rabbit hole and the more I research and more I learn, I'm like, I can't believe, have you read Empire of Blue Water?
Yes, that was actually the first book that was the book that made me realize, okay, like the game Blood and Plunder needs to be bigger.
Yeah, dude, like I read that book. I actually found that when we bought this house, I was at Goodwill just trying to find cool books for my bookshelves. Now I have the opposite problem. I have way too many books, way too many RPGs. But I was like, Empire, I found that at Goodwill. I was like, this looks cool. It sounds cool. I'm gonna put this on my shelf. And then I read it one day and this book is the book that really convinced me that Captain Blood, that's just stealing Henry Morgan's real life. Henry Morgan's was a freaking movie. I don't know. Are there any other books like that have just or things from pirate history that have just blown you away that you can't believe are real?
Yeah, a ton. Oh my goodness. Especially because there's so much of it that hasn't really reached popular culture yet, I guess. Yeah. Because there's so much, it typically goes with the fantasy stories, but they're all inspired by real people. Like the guy, one of our main characters in Blood and Plunder, Lolone, is just a complete psychopath. The stories,
absolute psychopath.
I mean, some of the stuff that these guys did and got away with, not really, but were able to get away with for so long. And there's a ton of stories. I mean, I just remember there's one that's a really hard one to get your hands on, but there's a French priest called Labat. Labat, and I think there's a rum named after him or something. But anyway, his chronicles and just the way and all the stuff that he sees. And this would be, I think this is the early 1700s. So this is kind of like the French still have their buccaneers and stuff, but and that culture still exists, but there's it's kind of dying off.
Yeah.
But he kind of goes and just all his experiences and the things that he sees and talks about. It's just like, man, you couldn't make this stuff up. It's just such a wild story. His story, and it's all his memoirs in the Caribbean. It's just it's wild, the stuff that happens.
It's absolutely wild place. It's funny you mentioned Lolonais because he's in my book, Dark Caribbean. But of course, because of the time, I pay a lot of attention to the timeline. My setting is 1715, so he's already dead. But of course, it's overrun by the undead. So really, he's come back as this ghoulish guy called the Flail who eats hearts to stay like corporeal. I was like, of course, he ate too many hearts when he was alive, which is like the real story of, what an insane.
He was known for that. Yeah, another guy who's Lawrence de Graaf. That's another guy who's like, this is like real life Jack Sparrow, but like if Jack Sparrow was like a Navy SEAL. This guy was just incredible. Like all the stuff you see like in movies and stuff. Like he did the whole, like he fought off like two massively superior ships and did the whole thing where he sailed between the two of them and fired at both sides and just tore him up. And it's like all that. And he captured one, the other one retreated. Like he was just like a lunatic type of stuff he did. Different time,
definitely different time. And just like the fact that, I know they get, romanticized in the writings, but still like a lot of those things are like real people or like, the fact that Henry Morgan was like, okay, we're taking you back to England to throw you in jail. Just kidding. You're a knight now. Can you go run Jamaica for us? Like what? Like, it's amazing. Another one you mentioned on your Facebook a while ago is this one, the Sea Rovers.
Yes.
Sea Rovers Practice. I love this book. If you're into how pirates actually did it, like how they actually did their thing, it's a great book to pick up. Do you have any thoughts on that one? Any tips that you've learned? So
that one totally changed the direction of the way the units were coming together. So like all the special rules in Blood and Plunder and the unit types and all that kind of, they had all their foundation in that book. Learning the nitty gritty of the tactics of how they fought, how they did things, why the weapons that they would carry and the way they would fight with those weapons. They had a lot of unconventional ideas, new things. They were early adopters of advanced technology, which is crazy, right? Like these guys out in the middle of nowhere in the Caribbean. The Caribbean is literally nowhere at this time, they're like adopting flintlocks, which are, a fairly new thing and not very easy to get. Cartridge pouches with paper cartridges, like you always see, instead of the apostles, all the tubes that they have running across the chest, and just a bunch of stuff like that. And their focus on accuracy. They literally had guns designed after the way these guys fought. They invented a type of musket, that was named after them, and all these just crazy things that you learn in that book, and the way they would board and the way boarding tactics work was really, that was some of the most interesting stuff I read. How prevalent canoes were. As a fighting vessel. It's surprising to me. Canoes, and like I had not really heard of piragua before your guys' game in that book, which I'm assuming is what they're related. Yes. It's basically just a very big canoe. Big giant canoe. Yeah.
Hold fast, wretched sailor. We brace for the broadside barrage.
First war game you ever played?
Battletech.
Do they have editions?
Sort of. So that would have been the book that was the current edition when I started playing was Battletech Compendium, I think it was called. So that's kind of like an edition, but it's really the same. It hasn't really changed anything much.
Can you give it circa what year?
So that would have been 1997.
So the Battletech that I'm familiar with. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Most recent war game you've played?
Battletech, actually.
Love
just
it.
To not give the same answer. Just to not give the same answer right before that would have been Old World. So there you go.
Oh, okay. Warhammer.
Yeah, Warhammer Old.
Yeah, okay. My brother he's trying to get me into Age of Sigmar right now, and I'm like, I don't know, man. And then I looked at all the Seraphon Lizardmen. I'm like, ooh, I love lizard folk. So.
They look really good. Yeah, gotta give them credit for that.
How about for RPGs? I know you're not an RPG guy, but what the first RPG you ever played? You mentioned earlier was
a homebrew. Yeah, a D20 homebrew. So
okay, great.
And then most recent would have been War Stories, actually.
If you had to fly your own Jolly Roger, what would the symbol be?
I have always really loved the fake Jack Rackham one with the swords.
Yeah. I have a cool little book on like the history.
I think that's what's on your shirt, right?
Yeah, this one. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's the one.
Yeah.
That's mine.
That's the one. I love that you picked the one I'm wearing. Actually, this is actually from the Nassau Pirates Museum. I got.
Oh, nice.
But I think it's really funny because I have a little book on the history of Jolly Rogers, but it's kind of all BS. Like there are only a few that are, it's all
real. Yeah, it's very disappointing to learn that. Yeah,
it is disappointing. That's one of those ones that we just, as game designers, are like, yeah, you know what? We're gonna go with the flags. If you were a 5th level character in a fantasy RPG, what class would you be?
Probably have to lean in that setting toward a ranger, but otherwise probably a swashbuckler.
That's the perfect answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Add an entry to the what's in the cargo hold of the Ship of the Dead D100 table.
So the heart of a kraken. The still beating heart of a kraken. There we go.
Love that answer. Love that answer.
It's powering the ship.
Oh, it's powering the ship. Love that.
There you go.
Favorite size die?
Has to be the D10.
I thought maybe you'd say D8 because
D8 is a close. D8 is a close second. D8's a very nice spread, but I just overall like the D10 better. I would have done Oak and Iron in D10, but it's just not a good surface for symbols.
Yeah, for our listeners, Oak and Iron. I'm assuming Blood and Plunder too. You have unique dice. It's not just.
No, Blood Plunder's D10s. Yeah, just regular.
Okay. That's why.
Oak and Iron is the only proprietary one. Yeah.
Okay. Oak and Iron but they have symbols. So it's like cutlasses, swords, muskets. Yeah. Do you have a favorite pirate from history?
Yeah. So favorite pirate from history is definitely Stede Bonnet.
I love that. Did you watch Our Flag Means Death?
I did. I don't like the way they portrayed him there, but I did enjoy the show.
I didn't either. I like the show.
I feel like they could have done better with his character because to me, Stede Bonnet, what I love about him is that he's like a guy like us. If a guy like us with the means, right, and the lunacy, enough, just unhinged, just enough to just, you go to the movies and you watch Pirates of the Caribbean, you're like, I could do that. Dude,
that's me. Yeah.
And then you just go and you buy a ship and you hire a crew and like, let's go. We're gonna be pirates now. And that just to me is so insane. Like, and then it's definitely. Yeah. And he's kind of like he's terrible at it, but he's not that unsuccessful for all things considered. Especially like his last battle, he kind of goes out, pretty good. He puts up a good fight. Yeah.
And he died by the noose. Like he's got to be somewhat of a real pirate if you die by the noose, right?
Right, exactly. So he's just fascinating to me. Just a lunatic. So that's how
he's one of those guys. I mean, him and Blackbeard both. I mean, honestly, all of them. That you're just like, what would it be like if I had a time machine? What would it actually? I can't even imagine what it would have really been like. To sail with those dudes. Do you have a favorite pirate town from history?
I don't know if it qualifies quite as a pirate town, but it was for very, very short periods. But St. Augustine, just because of how it inspired me to kind of like learn so much and just such a huge course of my life. Pirates held St. Augustine for long enough to be considered a pirate town for very short periods of time.
Yeah. We have talked a lot about doing a like Pirate Borg mini convention, a little RPG con. And I keep on saying, I mean, it's not like the Caribbean, it's not in the Caribbean, but like that would be such a good town because it's like one of the only towns that kind of still feels piratey,
Yeah. It's close enough. Listen, the Bahamas isn't even technically in the Caribbean.
Yeah, I know. Right? I mean, like you're going to go to Nassau. That's not technically the Caribbean, right? Yeah.
Right.
So
it's not
the Caribbean Sea. Yeah.
People consider that kind of the Caribbean, even though it's not. That's fine. We're close enough. Definitely here in South Florida. We don't really have the European culture of any kind here from history, but up until 1900s, early 1900s, but still.
Do you have a favorite Oak and Iron ship?
I really like the new galleon a lot. But I really enjoy the petite frigate. Just the light frigate is just my favorite one to just sail around. It's just so maneuverable and it's kind of like good balance of things. It's one of the ones I enjoy playing the most. And you can do a lot of tricky stuff with it.
You get the gun power and the maneuverability and the speed. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
What about, do you have like a favorite Blood and Plunder unit?
That has to be the flibustiers. That's definitely the one that in almost every game I'm running those guys. So.
RPG or fantasy setting you would most want to live in?
Yeah, so totally like Middle Earth. I can rock that. Yeah, definitely.
Hands down. Like, are you hanging in Hobbiton or Rivendell or what's your vibe?
I think I would have to be in like in Gondor where the port is.
Oh, right? Like Peligreer.
Peligreer. There you go. That's the one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Did you watch Rings of Power?
Yes. Up to date.
Yeah. Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars for me. Although I really appreciate Star Trek for what it tries to do.
Do you have a favorite fantasy movie, TV show, or book? Or you know what? I'm going to say favorite pirate fantasy movie, book, or TV show.
So Black Sails was great, but I think ultimately the thing that's always super nostalgic for me and that I watch just every once in a while is the Disney rendition of Treasure Island.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
absolute classic.
Just love the Long John Silver character in that one is just so well executed.
Yeah, he's so good. Yeah.
And then second, kind of another movie that's probably equal to that one, that not technically a pirate movie, but is Master and Commander. So yeah, I actually didn't watch that movie until after I had started Firelock, because it was just somehow just totally escaped my radar.
Wow, really?
And then when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Dude, that guy wrote he wrote so many books in that line. I actually have a cool book over here called A Sea of Words. It's just a lexicon of words that guy uses in his novels. Just so I can be like, I need some nautical words real quick, you know? Yeah. Favorite libation or beverage during your gaming sessions?
Ooh, it's gonna be rum. Unironically, that's just it just happens.
It's like not. It's not.
I promise it wasn't on purpose. It wasn't. Part
I love
of the
that
shtick.
though.
It just really is.
It's funny because I'm actually not. I mean, I like rum, but I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm a rum guy. I'd say I'm a tequila or bourbon would be my go-to, and people always give me rum because I'm like a pirate guy. You know.
Yeah. Well,
so that works out for you. I'm sure you've been
gifted
rum.
Work out well. Yes, all the time.
Yeah. Would you have a favorite?
I'll go with my go-to, which is I like Spanish rums mostly. So I really just love like the Havana Club. It's almost impossible to get it here.
It's very hard to get it here. Yeah.
Yes. And it's hard for me to get it, even though I have, family in Cuba and everything. It's impossible now. So it used to be easier, but now it's just difficult. But the Havana Club, there's one it's like they're 12-year aged, but it's fantastic.
Yeah, I was in Canada a couple of years ago, and a colleague of mine was like, "Dude, you gotta try Havana Club," and I was like, "What?" I hadn't even heard of it, but since we were in Canada, they didn't have the embargoes. It was like, video game or computer game you've logged the most hours playing.
I don't know. It's gonna definitely be one of two series, I guess. So either the Sid Meier's Pirates games or Mech Warrior, all the different Mech Warrior games. So I've been playing.
I love it. You're so
games,
on brand. I love it.
Yeah. So the Mech Warrior games is what got me into tabletop in the first place, because I got Mech Warrior 2 with my first PC, my Packard Bell PC when I was in middle school. And I fell in love with that game. I thought it was super cool. And then I was in a Hobbytown USA store, and I saw that they had the tabletop game, and I didn't even know that existed. So obviously I immediately jumped into that, and that's kind of what started the process of tabletop gaming for me.
Yeah.
And obviously growing up when I was little, I mean, me and my brother, I think we spent an entire summer playing Sid Meier's Pirates.
So you're talking like what was it? PC, Mac, or
so
Atari?
That was we played it on the NES. Back in the 80s. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
weird because people mentioned that game. People mentioned the 2004 reboot a lot.
Yes. I played the hell out of that
which I played a lot of that one, but like I also played the black and white Mac one, I played Pirates Gold. Nice. I'm like, dude, those games were like so captivating back then,
Oh my gosh,
go to a stormy port and get a mission,
The Pirates game for the 80s, that open world sandbox thing that was like, I've never seen it. That just totally captivated me.
Yeah, and with the roving famous pirates that get richer and richer the longer you go. Oh man, right. So yeah. Well, I think you answered my last question, which was favorite pirate themed video game. But do you have a runner up? Is there a second one that you would throw in?
I don't think there is. I think that's pretty much. I get into things and I just don't care about everything else around there.
Dude, Sid Meier's Pirates is. I just want to be like. He's actually on my list, a short list of like, can I get them on the show? But I don't want to get him on the show and be like, hey, dude, let's talk about a game that you made 40 years ago. That's all I want to talk about is that and the reboot from 04. Like, I don't care about Civilization. Civilization's cool, but let's talk about pirates,
I can't even remember the names of them, but I had picked up a few other kind of pirate themed games, but none of them.
Have you played like Monkey Island?
No, I've never actually played that one.
Oh man, you gotta play Monkey Island, man.
I've heard it's very good. Yes, I think it's on the iPad now, so I should be able to.
Yeah,
that's like the only time I play video games now. Really, is occasionally on my iPad.
And then I feel like Assassin's Creed Black Flag is basically a modern Sid Meier's Pirates. I mean,
yeah, I haven't played that one, so I haven't since. Oddly, which is not typical for somebody of my generation, but pretty much I played video games a lot up until like Super Nintendo, and then I kind of just stopped altogether. And then I started playing, I started playing games on the PC, and then that was, I don't know, I played like back then a bunch of different things, but I kind of just got into a clan in Mech Warrior, and literally stayed playing with that same clan in different leagues and stuff until I'm still technically in it. I don't play very much, but
that's awesome.
So forever. And that kind of took over all my gaming life.
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar trajectory in that, like, there are decades in there where I didn't play hardly any video games, you know, except for the occasional pirate game. So I remember I got a Nintendo Wii U. The only game I played was Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which I 100%ed. My wife was like, "You're still playing that game?" I was like, "Yes, it's the only one that matters." You know? Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can people find you on the internet, and where can they find out more about Firelock Games? And what Kickstarters are we most looking forward to coming up that you guys are promoting?
So first of all, I mean, obviously the best place to go is just firelockgames.com. All our socials are there. We're on Instagram, Facebook, a lot on Facebook, Discord. You can find us on all those places. Obviously, we're in lots of local hobby shops near you.
You have a very strong community too, which we do.
We have an awesome community, which I'm so grateful for. They're amazing. Yeah. So, and then you can check that there's tons of blogs. We have Dead Man's Chest, Blood and Pigment, Timber and Sail, a bunch of other ones, but those are the ones off the top of my head. And as far as Kickstarters this year, so this coming up, we have Blood and Bayonets. So probably be out by the time this is out. And then that's a Napoleonic Skirmish. After that, we've got a War Stories Pacific RPG. And that's also going to have box sets for Europe and the Pacific, as well as other things. Brigands of Aja is the name of the skirmish game that we are coming out with. That's kind of in the beginning of that's setting the prequel for our fantasy setting. And we've got a few others, but those are the ones that are like set in the works. But we've also got Oak and Iron 2nd edition coming out, regular release this year. We've got a couple expansions for Blood and Plunder, a bunch of new models for that coming out this year. So there's a ton of stuff about to come out and saturate.
Well, we'll put links in the show notes to all the ones that matter. And yeah, Mike, how about what cons am I going to see at this year? Just Gen Con? So
we'll be at Adepticon. Adepticon is our big show. That's where we kind of put on our big thing.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm always at Gary Con. It's not quite a RPG convention there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's around the same time, I think.
Yeah.
Gen Con we'll be at this year. We'll also be at, we do our local Florida shows. We have the two big ones are Recon and Huracan in April and September. We'll be at those. Those are always a ton of fun. And then Skirmish Con, we will probably make an appearance at. I believe it's in a couple weeks now. Those are all in Florida. Those are just kind of local shows.
Yeah.
But our two big ones this year, it's pretty much just going to be Adepticon and Gen Con. And we're looking into doing Nova Open. Almost certainly won't be this year. I'm pretty sure we're too late. But there's a good chance we'll be at that one next year. Because that seems like it's shaping up to be a pretty good show. Or I think it already is, really. I think we're just missing the trick on that one. So PAX Unplugged we did one time, but I this part of the year, we're kind of like in the opposite of the rest of the country. This part of the year is the part of the year where we want to be outside doing things with the family and whatnot. So I try not to travel too much between October and March. So March is kind of like when we jump back into it.
Yeah, you got to go sailing, huh?
Yes, exactly. This is I was just sailing this weekend. It was great.
Awesome.
It's this is the time of year where the weather's great here. After in the summer, not so much. So I don't mind leaving where it's a little bit cooler. Not much cooler.
Yeah, sure.
Typically, but
sure.
You've been listening to the Ship of the Dead podcast. Email your questions, comments, and buried treasure tips to shipofthedead@limithron.com. You can support the program, join our Discord server, get early access to new episodes, and instantly download hundreds of battle maps, assets, and adventures at limithron.com/Patreon. Tiers start as low as $2 a release, and you only get charged when I make something new. Pirate Borg, my rules-light, rum-infested hack of Morkborg, is available now at pirateborg.com and retail stores everywhere. Ship of the Dead is produced by Limithron LLC, our audio editor is Matt Kepler, and our music is by Alexander Miller. For more, head to limithron.com.